The teacher says, find a partner, and a split second before the words are even out, you already know exactly what's about to happen. Two people from your friend group are already glancing at each other, already shifting slightly toward one another, already decided. So you look down at your phone or off to the side because pretending you didn't notice is the only way to avoid looking like the odd one out in real time. Then one of them says, come join us. Or, we'll be a group of 3. And you say, yeah, sure, and sit down next to them because everything's fine, nobody did anything wrong, and there's really no reason to be upset. But something inside still tightens. That feeling, being technically part of the group but somehow always half a step to the side, is genuinely hard to explain, even to yourself. The first explanation that comes to mind is a familiar one. I'm just too sensitive, or I'm making things up in my head. But psychology actually sees this differently, and what you're feeling isn't a flaw or a weakness. It's a very specific way the nervous system operates in someone who has learned, somewhere along the way, to expect not being chosen. What makes this kind of pain so strange and so persistent is that it doesn't come from one big event. Nobody looked you in the eye and said, we don't really want you here. Nobody removed you from the group chat in some dramatic way. Nobody announced the friendship was over. It happens differently. 3 of you are walking down the sidewalk and 2 of them end up side by side while you fall a half step behind. That's just how sidewalks work, right? In the group chat, the 2 of them bounce jokes back and forth and your messages get answered later, shorter, a little flatter. You find out they hung out over the weekend and nobody was being deliberately secretive, you just weren't invited. In class, when the professor asks everyone to pair up for a project, they catch each other's eye before you even have a chance to say anything. Each of these moments on its own is nothing, just coincidence, just the way things played out. But when those moments keep stacking up, they collapse into one quiet, persistent conclusion. There's something real between them, and I'm just convenient. And that conclusion isn't really about the situation anymore. It's about you. Psychologists call this rejection sensitivity, the tendency to pick up on even weak signals of potential rejection quickly and to feel them disproportionately hard. It's not a fixed personality trait in the sense of that's just how this person was built. It's a learned setting of the nervous system that developed in reaction to past experience. If you've ever been through social exclusion before, left out in a previous friend group, sidelined in a different class, shut out in whatever context, your brain logged that as a threat and learned to prepare for it in advance. It began scanning the environment for microsignals. Who's laughing with whom? Who texts first? Who gravitates toward whom when there's a choice? Not because you're paranoid, but because at some point that scanning was how you kept yourself from getting hurt. In high school and college, this hits especially hard because friendship there isn't just about having a good time. It's also about belonging, about social standing, about having people who are yours, about basic day-to-day safety. When researchers look at how social exclusion affects teenagers, they find that being left on the margins registers in the adolescent brain as a genuine threat signal, not a minor social inconvenience. The brain at this age treats group acceptance as something with almost physical weight, which is why something that looks trivial from the outside, 2 people sitting down without thinking to include you, can feel, on the inside, like much more than a slightly awkward moment. Part of this has to do with attachment style. People with an anxious attachment style, and that's a significant portion of teenagers and young adults, depend heavily on external confirmation that a connection is still intact because the internal sense of we're okay is inherently hard for them to hold on to. They need signals. Who reached out first? Who got invited? Who someone chose to open up to? Social ambiguity hits them harder than it hits most people because without clear signals, the anxiety simply doesn't settle. And here's the thing that's almost painfully accurate. In a friend group of 3, ambiguity is practically built into the structure. 3 is an asymmetrical dynamic by nature. Almost inevitably, someone is slightly closer to one than the other. Someone initiates more. Someone has more shared history, and nobody consciously decided that it's just how things tend to shake out. But for someone with high rejection sensitivity, this natural asymmetry doesn't read as we're all just different. It reads as they're the real pair, and I'm the third wheel. And then comes what psychologists call friendship jealousy. Not the kind that's easy to own up to, and not the kind anyone feels okay feeling. It's quieter and sharper than that, You're not hurting because someone is treating you badly. You're hurting because someone who matters to you is emotionally closer to someone else. Research on adolescence shows that friendship jealousy is incredibly common, but also incredibly hard to admit to, because you can't exactly be mad at your friend for having another friend. That sounds ridiculous, even inside your own head. So the feeling stays there, unspoken, unacknowledged, slowly building with nowhere to go. Because of that shame, you start behaving in ways that can look baffling from the outside. You try to make yourself as low maintenance as possible, never complaining, never seeming bothered, always going along, being useful, being fun, being available, anything to avoid getting cut out completely. You're always the one to text first, always the one to suggest plans, always adjusting to fit their schedule, because if you stop doing that, it feels like the whole thing will quietly fall apart. And that knowledge is its own kind of painful. After every hangout, every conversation, every shared class or party, your brain starts replaying the details, not because something is wrong with you, but because your attention is wound so tight. What exactly happened? Who talked to whom? More, how they responded, whether it felt warm enough, all of it filtered through a conclusion your brain has already mostly reached. And even good moments don't always help. They can take the edge off the anxiety temporarily, but they can't give you that stable internal sense of I actually belong here, because anxiety feeds on uncertainty, and as long as there's even a little uncertainty left, it keeps running. Sometimes this leads to what psychologists describe as a self-fulfilling pattern. You become a little more tense, a little more easily hurt, a little more withdrawn, and that genuinely does make things harder between you. Then you think, see, you made it weird, and take that as yet another piece of evidence that you're secondary, when really it's the result of carrying too much internal pressure for too long. The pain creates behavior that creates more pain, and breaking out of that loop without understanding what's actually happening is genuinely hard. There's one belief worth dismantling because it lives in the heads of almost everyone who has been through this. If I'm not the one they choose first, that means I'm genuinely worth less as a person. That conclusion is too brutal, and it's wrong. So much of friendship comes down to shared history, how long two people have known each other, the random context that put them side by side first, inside jokes that built up over time, temperaments that clicked early. Being the one who ends up a little further out doesn't mean you're less interesting or less valuable. It means you're in a dynamic that doesn't quite fit you. The most painful part of this isn't loneliness in the traditional sense. Loneliness is the absence of people. But you're not without people. There are conversations, there are shared moments, there are people right there. The pain is that closeness exists right next to you, and you're always almost inside it, but never quite all the way in. You're not suffering from emptiness. You're suffering from intimacy without certainty. If you recognized yourself in any of this, it doesn't mean something is broken in you. It means your mind is exceptionally attuned to distance, that what you need isn't just company, but the actual feeling of being chosen, and that you've probably spent too long trying to feel safe somewhere that only ever gave you safety in small, uncertain doses. That's not weakness, and it's not being dramatic. It's a very accurate description of what happens when your need for closeness is real, and the confirmation of it keeps falling just slightly short.